And I'm Zach.
And this is Those Who Conspire. Welcome, everybody, to a special video edition of Those Who Conspire. And if you're listening on audio, well, you'll just have to imagine the most handsome men ever talking to each other about something that actually matters deeply to everybody. I'm sorry to use humor to lead in, but this is going to be a heavy episode. We're coming up on the 20th anniversary of the September 11th, 2001 terror attacks. And with us today is our beloved science expert, Christo Smith, who is going to talk about some of the science behind the conspiracy theories. But we're also going to be talking about the emotional attachment that we all have to the 9/11 attacks and conspiracy. So this will be kind of a deeper episode. We'll throw in some humor to balance it out, but if at the end of the day you want us to give you a hug, we'll happily send you a virtual one. If you have any questions, thoughts, your own memories you want to share on the September 11th terrorist attacks, please feel free to reach out to us at our Facebook, Those Who Conspire. You can also find us on Twitter at ConspireWho. You can also reach out to us on our Gmail account, thosewhoconspire@gmail.com. Share your stories. We're happy to talk with you about what you've gone through. Let's get into this.
Wait, hold on real quick. When did we start doing all our credits at the top of the episode? Well, that wasn't ever discussed.
Since you've mentioned me at least twice, when do I get to introduce myself?
Never, okay?
People know who you are.
That's going to be our lane, Christo, is just going to be meekly introducing you, but then never really going about and doing it. It's the opposite of, like, the Southern hospitality that we all have, okay? So, you'll know when your turn is.
Okay, I'll be over here if you need me.
Christo, do you want to say a few things about yourself?
My name is Christo Smith. I'm happy to be on the cast. The pod, what am I supposed to, how are you supposed to, it doesn't matter. I'm happy to be here with you two fine gentlemen, and, hopefully I'll bring some scientific knowledge to bear against these extremely preposterous conspiracy theories.
You sounded like you were writing a community theater bio.
I am. I thought this was a one-act play we were doing. Ah, shit.
Hold on, wait. I've got the stage directions, too. All you have to do is just keep saying that you're Willie Lomax and you've got $20,000 and a can't-miss plan.
It says in my script, force laugh at Zach.
Don't worry, I have that taped on my laptop, so I know when I have to do it.
He's got one guy that stands behind that's like, clap, clap.
Yeah, my emotional difficulties and neurodivergence notwithstanding. So, yeah, that's something that we have
It's
to
much more plaintive than that. He's like, please clap. Please.
There's going to be a lot of discussion about the role of the Bush family in this pod. And it's also going to be a role of discussion, frankly, going beyond conspiracy theories and going to the impact that the September 11th terrorist attacks had on the past 2 decades, which are incalculable. I mean, we don't have a 4-hour pod lined up for you, but we're just going to speak very briefly about how it changed our lives. Let's dive into this. I don't know if I need to tell you what happened on September 11th, but for the purpose of this, we'll just go over some of the bigger details. On September 11th, 2001, four airplanes were flown into various American landmarks. 2 planes crashed into what was then the World Trade Center towers. 1 plane flew into the U.S. Pentagon. And another plane, United Flight 93, was diverted and crashed outside of its intended destination. So exactly. So there we have a massive loss of life and a huge shakeup, particularly for the citizens of New York City, but also for the world. And I'm really, like, ballparking a lot of this just because there are some people that may just need that recap. Most of us don't. Our listeners are probably around our age or slightly younger, so they lived through it. But that's the general idea of what happened. Culture itself also shifted in the wake of the September 11th attacks. Obviously, nobody remembers Schwarzenegger's film from that year, but only because it obliquely referenced a political talking point that was made regarding collateral damage and the impacts of war and terrorism and what have you. I mean, the war on terror became the focal point through which we viewed so much of our world, right? That, to me, is just how something like collateral damage could ever get enough heft and not just be, oh, that's another good one. Let's give Arnold Schwarzenegger another beach house and eventually governorship of California. That was, yeah.
What I think is crazy is that this was like the first step Marvel made into interacting in the real world, because after 9/11, they did that huge ensemble. They brought in all the talent they could, spared absolutely no expense, and did like this huge edition of all the superheroes in the Avengers dealing with 9/11 and how they like helped the firefighters and like gave the reason why like in the world of the MC or the Marvel universe it did not stop 9/11. Like the towers are gone in Marvel New York, and they explained that. Because to continue on, like, nothing had radically changed the landscape they were based out of would have been, like, hugely disrespectful. But you had to explain why Spider-Man didn't stop it from happening, and they did that.
Marvel, God, this is gonna, like, derail the pod a bit, but I'm glad that we're doing this, because the Marvel universe has always been a reflection of our universe in comics, too. So when J. Michael Straczynski and John Romita Jr. did that issue of The Amazing Spider-Man that dealt with the September 11th attacks, and they have that image that starts with Spidey overlooking the towers as they've fallen, and what would be ground zero. It's just shocking. I mean, this is the one where, depending on your barometer for emotional involvement, you either think it's touching or it's corny that Doctor Doom is there crying over what has been done. But it does reflect a changing understanding of politics, too. And then this will tie in with later things that Zach and I are doing, but that's where Mark Miller comes in and remakes the Avengers into the Ultimates in a post-9/11 world. Yeah.
And then the Ultimate Universe pretty much shaped the entire MCU. But what you can essentially say is the reason we have the MCU right now is a mix of Iron Man in 2008 and September 11th in 2001.
Yes, I talk about this in my master's thesis. Shout out to Miami University for doing it. Oh yeah, absolutely. I talk about how V for Vendetta, Iron Man, and The Dark Knight are all tied in to depictions of the war on terror and actually being something that the audience can agree on, how they how these films discuss the ideology of the war on terror, our responses to it, and implement iconography, but also making it mass entertainment. It's the first real successful one. I mean, you don't see people talking about what was it, Stop Loss, the movie that was made with Ryan Philippe, and yeah, that was another blatant 9/11 movie, too. We're not necessarily also talking about Oliver Stone's World Trade Center. I think that came out in 2008.
Or U-93 or whatever it was with Nicolas Cage.
Oh, that was United... No, that was United in 93. That was the Paul Greengrass film that came out shortly afterwards. Yeah, there's so much of...
Christo, were you in Japanese class with me on 9/11 where I remember we were watching the reports because it was like it was like later in the day.
Wow.
And I remember
No, it was not later in the day. I remember exactly where I was because I was in second period English.
Oh no! I'm not saying
we were in the library.
I'm not saying that was. I'm saying it was way afterwards. Like when it happened, I was taking an exam in Mr. Hatfield's class for social studies, and as soon as the last person turned in their paper, he immediately switched off the lights, turned on the TV, and said, "There's been a plane that flew into the World Trade Center." And I was like, "What is the World Trade Center?" I didn't know what it was. Like I guess I just didn't know. And then after that, I remember they made an announcement over the PA, and all y'all were there. They made an announcement over the PA. They were like, "Teachers, please don't keep the televisions on all day." And it didn't matter. Everyone kept their televisions on all day long.
No, everyone did. No, we watched that. We went home. This is for real something that happened to me. We watched it all day, and then I went to my friend's house, and we walked in the front door, and I looked at him and I was like, so I guess we're going to invade Iraq. That I was like, sure that was gonna. I was like 15. I was just like, I just knew for some reason that George W. Bush was going to make that happen, and lo and behold,
you're right. Kyle, where were you?
Jesus Christ. I mean, I thought that we were going to be doing this a little bit later in the pod, but we'll do this now. I was in Mr. Hunter's first period English, and let's give some context to those who are listening. Zach, Christo, and I, we all went to the same high school. That's why we're talking about this and have this shared feeling. We were all in high school at the same time on the same day. And so what you're going to hear are three guys whose lives changed dramatically in an instant when this happened. I'm in Mr. Hunter's first period English. I'm out there working with well, I won't say her name just because, she probably doesn't want to be named on here, but, I was working with a classmate on a project outside, and then I remember another person, this is vivid, that she was running through the hallway, and she saw us working, and we're going, what's up? And she said, a plane just flew into the World Trade Center, and then just ran away to tell other people, and she was crying, like, because who the hell wouldn't be? And then I just remember going into Mr. Hunter's class, and he was pissed because I'm turning on the TV, and then there's the second plane that just collides into the tower, and from there on, I just kind of go numb the rest of the day. Like, this is the other thing that happened, too. For those that need other context, I was taking college classes at Georgetown College. We all went to Scott County High School in Georgetown, Kentucky, and I was taking college classes at Georgetown College. Go Tigers. And I went to school there after high school, and just nobody was there. The entire campus was barren, and there was no note up on the door where the teacher would have been given our psychology class, and so I just am sort of sitting around in an empty hallway for 10 minutes before I drive home, and my mom hugs me in tears.
All right. So, allow me to tell my story, and then, Zach, you got yours. May I? You had me on for some context here. So, I thought it was second period, but I remember I was in the library. I remember that because we were researching for an English paper, and maybe I had first period English. Me and Kyle were not the same year in high school, so it could have been, Miss Sims, I think. And we were in the library, and a teacher just quietly walked in and turned on the television in the library. And I remember watching it, and they kept replaying the first plane hitting, and they were discussing how it was like, oh my god, what are we going to do, this stuff's going to go. And then the second plane hit, and I was like, 15? I had no concept. I had, absolutely no concept of war, damage, terror, and I saw it happen, and I was like, this looks like the scene from, an action movie. And the news anchor came on, and she said, many people are likening this to the scene from an action movie, and it made me realize that as Americans in the early 2000s, we were so inured from the concept of terror and explosions and strife that we didn't have a frame of reference for something this horrible, so they just liken it to Hollywood. And then, so I'm watching, and then they show the people jumping from the towers because they're on fire, and they're like, well, we can't go down the stairs. And the first images of that, the explosion was like one of those things where it's so big you can't actually conceptualize what's happening. But when a news crew zooms in and they're like, that's not debris falling, those are people jumping, that is what, destroyed me. And I was so, I was just trying to work it out in my brain, but we go home, I go to my friend's house, and we always went to their house after school, and we were like, clearly there's going to be a war, this is not, I can already tell George W. Bush is, somehow becoming like a paternal figure to America all in like side of an hour. But like, I remember hating George W. Bush so much because I was like 14 and like I thought I was the most liberal dude on earth. And he made his address, and when he made his address, I was at home, and he was like choking up, and I was like, this dude can't even read flashcards or whatever. Look at him. What an idiot. And my parents, who were also the most liberal people on earth, are like, he's trying to hold back tears, damn it. And they were like mad at me for making fun, and I was like, well, damn. Well, now I just look like a dick. Like, I felt so bad. Like, I somehow, for like a brief moment, divorced the tragedy of what was happening with the politics and like the humanization of our president. And then it just made me look like a cold, unfeeling monster. And then it all comes together like in the coming days. It's a really strange feeling. I've definitely not gone through anything like that again.
Yeah, after it hit in Hatfield's class, we watched the towers come down, and the whole day I just remember like going through class. The whole day kind of felt like it was a daze, like when like a tragedy happens and you're kind of in shock, but you're not in shock. You're with it, but everything seems like it's moving in slow motion, but you also don't remember anything that's happening because it feels like it's going so quick. That's the way it felt for me. And I remember later I was in Japanese class. I think it was Japanese 1 or 2 or something. And we were watching the TV, and Mr. Patton, he had the television on, and we, like I said, we were watching it, and I just kind of had a moment, and I guess it was just like my 15-year-old brain just kind of trying to like process what was happening. But it occurred to me, and I said out loud, I said, they're going to make movies about this in like 10 or 15 years. And just like they made movies about Pearl Harbor, just like they made movies about other tragedies. And in my mind, I guess that was a way to cope or whatever, just to kind of separate myself from the reality of it. And Mr. Patton yelled at me in front of the class and was like, you can't say those things. This is a national tragedy. And I'm like, oh, no, I'm just making a statement that like I think that they're going to make a movie out of this. It ends up they made movies about it way earlier than I thought they were going to. But I just remember feeling terrible. And like I went home and my mom was just like watching videos and looking at pictures of people falling to their deaths over and over and over again. And that was that entire day. And I remember going to bed that night hoping they weren't going to reinstate the draft. And just being kind of scared about the future. And to be honest with you, that fear really never went away.
Guys, I was 18 years old. I was 18 when this all happened. Let me give you some context, because you just mentioned a movie. This is a movie-like scene. My best friend in the world, his birthday was September 10th. So we both turned 18 within a week of each other. And we're out there doing what any 18-year-old in the greater Kentucky area would do, which is going out and buying cigarettes and pornography upon turning 18. And we're standing there outside of the Rep Arena parking lot. Like, we'd also bought cigars, and we're smoking, and we're watching the sunset. And on September 10th, in the world's stupidest coincidence ever, I told my friend, like, our lives are going to change forever. Now, I hate myself in a lot of ways for that, because obviously none of what happened next was any cause of this. But to this day, I still live with those words hanging over everything. What should have been a sense of palpable joy was just ripped from millions of us in the instance of something that is still devastating to a national psyche, and it reverberates through all of us in here. Like, just hearing your stories just makes me sad, because this was my senior year. I think you were all, what, juniors or sophomores?
Sophomores. We were sophomores. Can I just say, my junior year, a year after 9/11, was the first time I ever traveled internationally. And just recently, the most recent time I traveled internationally was 2 weeks before they closed all international travel for the COVID pandemic. So basically, I'm going to stop leaving the country.
Wow.
Yeah, I was going to
But-
say, if you're going to leave the country, I need you to send me a message first. To make sure everything's all set.
The next 2 weeks to like 2 months after 9/11, every morning, they didn't just play the Pledge of Allegiance or whatever. They played the song God Bless America every morning, not like it's the national anthem. And there was another song that was really popular around that time about troops or something. But it was
Put a
like
boot in your ass. It's the American way, that one or whatever.
something like that.
Toby Keith's courtesy of the Red, White, and Blue eventually came out later, and we'll get into like the country music takeover. But yeah, Christo.
They played that like it was the Pledge of Allegiance. They were like the hyper patriotism that galvanized America in the 2 months after 9/11. Looking back on it with like some distance and perspective is like almost scary.
It goes beyond scary too. I was working in our town's Winn-Dixie. If you remember that place where you could go to get the IBC Black Cherry Cola that would eventually destroy my pancreas.
Right next to the Chinese buffet. I'm familiar.
Yeah, and then the Mancino's grinders that we would also go to. Like, this is the 3 months after September 11th, our Winn-Dixie radio, which was piped in from a nationally syndicated circuit, was all just pure patriotism Americana. I mean, anything that was pro-America was in there too. But that extended also to national radio. Think about how many songs, especially rock and roll songs and classics, were removed from the radio by calls from the FCC and by program directors in general. You lost all of Rage Against the Machine songs out of the radio, which, in the context of the time, probably would have been really damn helpful to think about reactions to. How many different songs came out and were changed? Jimmy World's album, Bleed American, and the title track to it got changed and got turned into Salt Sweat, and then the album just got called Jimmy Eat World, self-titled. The pop culture changes and the pro-America fixation were so great that we began to see all of this shift immensely. And what we don't know, or what we don't really have any concept of because we're stupid high school kids, is that there's an entire world shift politically that's also happening. And post 9/11, so much of our politics, particularly in the move towards a more surveillance state, a greater surveillance state, which we're still living with, overview of the FAA and TSA in particular, and then all sorts of other things like FCC regulations regarding what is American patriotism and what should be seen it's just, God, it's incalculable. Like, everything we're talking about, we don't really have the do we?
I mean, I the word I would use is proto-authoritarianism, because
that's
I
good.
mean, you got to think. Okay, here's dumb high school Christo's thought over here. This is 2002. V for Vendetta comes out. Natalie Portman, shaved head, super cute. Hugo Weaving, I'm on board. Let's go ahead and watch. I came out of that movie thinking that it was essentially anti-Bush propaganda, and I was on board. And that movie does not mention anything regarding America except in passing, where it says America simply exists. That's a movie.
Yeah, because that's all set in Thatcherite Britain.
Yeah. And so that was written about a reaction to 80s authoritarianism in Britain by Alan Moore. And what it was to me was a pushback against the uber patriotism of a post 9/11 America that was galvanized against human rights by the idea that if we're not all together, then the terrorist won.
Oh, God, yeah.
That's
I
a
mean,
lot.
Your timeline's a little bit off because it's 2006 and that was written and produced by the Wachowski sisters. But still,
it was. I just remember it being
was,
Bush propaganda in my mind.
Yeah, well, anti-Bush propaganda, and I'm all on board for that too, because by then we lived through parts of the War on Terror, and I'm also like, this sucks, okay?
Oh, no. I was just going to say, our listeners at this point, since we're 30 minutes into the episode, are probably wondering why we're doing it on Those Who Conspire. So, do y'all mind if I just cover a couple of the main conspiracies real quick?
Yeah, I'm done with therapy right now. I'll see my therapist again later in the week, but thank you for this.
You're getting charged for the hour.
I'd like to help you out, Zach, because I'd like to bring up my very favorite internet meme conspiracy theory. It became its own tagline that's so popular you can use it to make fun of people out of context of its original use. Jet fuel can't melt steel beams. You can just say that to people now, and there are people who use it as an insult that weren't even born in 2001. And it's an insult to call you an idiot.
You know, I'm going to be teaching those students here, so let's provide those context for this. Like, why would we say jet fuel can't melt steel beams?
So here are the conspiracies, all right? What if I told you that the Twin Towers were brought down by a controlled demolition and not by the planes hitting them? Witnesses at the scene reportedly heard explosions before the towers collapsed and debris shooting out of the lower levels. They also argue that the fire didn't burn long enough to cause catastrophic collapse. The melting point of steel is 1,510 degrees Celsius, whereas jet fuel burns between 426.6 and 815.5 Celsius. There's no way those steel beams would have given out. American Airlines Flight 77 never hit the Pentagon, but instead a missile or an unmanned drone. The structural damage to the building was far too minor to have been hit by this commercial airliner. The plane was 125 feet wide. How could it have caused only a 16-foot entry hole and just a 12-foot exit hole? Also, where's the debris? Where are the bodies? You can't see all of that in the official photos. World Trade Center 7, or Building 7, as it's referred to, collapsed entirely on its own, hours after the Twin Towers fell. This was obviously an inside job. People on the ground even heard the owner of the building telling people to pull it before the collapse. Also, the BBC reported Building 7 collapsed a full hour before it actually did. Sounds like an inside job to me. Anyways, those are the main conspiracies that 9/11 was an inside job. So we're going to be discussing those today.
I didn't think I'd get a whole recap of the documentary Loose Change, quote unquote, but here we go. Oh man, like, you know that you can still buy... What Zach's referring to is things that come from the documentary Loose Change, which is a thoroughly debunked piece on how the September 11th attacks were an inside job. And so all of those things come from this piece that you can still find on major streaming networks and Google Play at this point. I'm certainly not telling people to go find it, but I would say, you know, be aware of where this garbage comes from. So let's talk about why we have our favorite, so far only, guest here today to talk about the science behind it. Christo, give us the science behind the September 11th conspiracy theories.
Oh, goodness gracious me. Well, so let's see here. American Airlines Flight 11 was a Boeing 767-223. That can hold between 16,000 and 24,000 gallons of jet fuel. Now, jet fuel, anyone that says jet fuel is an idiot. There are like so many different types of jet fuel. I mean, they're not an idiot. Everyone is entitled to their own way of speaking. I'm sorry, except jet fuel is like saying gas. I mean, that's fine, but there's a difference between 83 and 92. Just ask your car's gaskets, am I right?
R.I.P. my Ford Tempo from high school.
Oh, yeah, I remember you had a Ford Tempo, and I was like, isn't it ironic that you have a car named after a Tempo, and it's the slowest thing I've ever been inside of? United Airlines Flight 175 was also a Boeing 767. The American Airlines Flight 77 was a 757, and it had generally about 11,000 gallons of fuel maximum when it took off. They were all taking off for international flights, which means they probably had close to or around the maximum of their fuel load, and they were turned around between 200 and 500 miles after they had left the airport, which means that they had most of that fuel left because they were ready to fly several thousand miles. They were also almost entirely full of passengers and luggage. So let's just say the turboprops that create thrust have 214 kilonewtons of force per engine. That's let's see, that's 214,000 newtons. That's enough to lift, let's see here, that's enough to lift 150 tons into the sky and make it go 600 miles an hour. Because that's what literally every 767 does. It takes 150 tons, it lifts it off of the Earth, it makes it go 0.6 times the speed of sound, and then you arrive safely where you're going. I did some rough calculations, back of the envelope kind of stuff, but imagine that you're going into a building. Now, a building is not a perfectly elastic, it's not Brownian motion, you're not bouncing off. These aren't pool balls, this is, in the terms of physics, this is squishy stuff. So, an airplane is going to go in, and I made the assumption that it's going to go in, and it's going to take about 10 meters of a skyscraper to stop it, because skyscrapers and airplanes are both mostly hollow. You wouldn't think that from the notion, but from a physical standpoint, it's mostly air in there. If skyscrapers weren't mostly hollow, there would be no point in building them, because it would be easier just to spread out on the ground. Because you need that hollow space for offices and cubicles, and by the way, in the case of, I think, the North Tower, several $100 million of priceless art that was destroyed. But on the lowest end of the scale, for the lowest weight I could find, we're looking at 5 times 10 to the 7th newtons of force to stop the plane. Now, that force goes throughout the building and also ignites several thousand gallons of jet fuel, because it's currently being pushed through a turboprop that is igniting it because it's supposed to. That's the whole point. On the highest possible end, we're talking about 2 times 10 to the 8th newtons. If you go to the Wolfram Alpha and type in 2.2 times 10 to the 8th newtons, it gives you a comparison. There's a chart. It's one of the helpful things about Wolfram Alpha. I used that and Engineering Toolbox and my computer calculator to do these. I have some equations. If anyone ever wants to see, feel free to ask. I'll send you my notes. But it gives it to you in order of magnitude compared to the thrust of the fucking space shuttle. Now, this all happens on a cross-section. It's not just two things hit each other. There's a cross-section going the plane goes into the building. That gives you force per area. And it's essentially, I believe, the thing that I really liked in terms of helping me grasp this. It would be like several hundred square feet of the building were suddenly 1,000 feet underwater and on fire. That's the amount of pressure we're talking about. And steel, at 700 degrees Celsius, or maybe steel at some degrees Celsius inside the range of jet fuel was found by MIT structural engineers to lose 50% of its strength at that heat.
I actually have that number. It's 593.3 Celsius.
Thank you. Now, at that point, it loses 50% of its strength. But I'm going to ask you, gentlemen, have you ever bent a paperclip until it broke?
Oh yeah.
All right, so
Of course, yeah.
after you bend it one time, it's never as strong again. These are structural I-beams in steel that are designed for, sure, like an earthquake, or to stand the test of direct pressure on the way they're oriented. But when you bend them, they're going to lose some percentage of their strength. These things cascade. Not only do these things cascade, but people talk like the inside of these buildings were not filled to the very brim with flammable things. Papers, documents, sadly, people. I mean, we're talking tiles and wall art and couches. These things catch fire, and any firefighter will tell you, like, a couch on fire is very hard to put out. Like, it's just a torch.
Firefighters in Lexington, Kentucky know after a UK game, I'll tell you that.
I was going to say, yeah, Lexington, Kentucky is the place where they would understand this the most right there.
And there are vortexes of air creating superheated elements, like heat going into stairwells and down elevator shafts, which, by the way, is how you get explosions in lower levels, because you get backdrafts. Like, the whole notion that jets couldn't do this to a building is preposterous. And I have one more thing. In 1944, when they finished construction on the Pentagon, we were in the middle of a world war. It was probably the most defensible building on the planet Earth. I am not shocked that the insane concrete construction that they made the world's largest office building out of did not immediately crumple on one attack. This does not shock me.
Well, they actually, one of the things that I found I actually didn't know this. According to the National Institute of Standards and Technology, they investigated the tower's collapse and found that the planes had caused considerable damage to both buildings' utility shaft systems because they sliced through the towers. And this allowed jet fuel to actually pour down the elevator shafts, and the fuel ignited, leading to raging fires gushing down the shafts. Many elevator cables were cut, the braking systems were disabled at impact, causing elevators to crash on the ground, smashing open lobby doors, and sending jets of burning fuel into all directions.
Okay, so
that's insane.
Well, think about this. I'm a space systems engineer by trade, and not a structural engineer or civil engineer. I did all of this research for this. And my immediate thought was, oh yeah, also backdrafts and thermal rush, like these things are going to create explosions on the lower levels. My innate understanding of science told me that, then MIT has just now confirmed it. This is, like, the things that happened, if you know anything about how thermodynamics or physics or buildings work, are naturally what's going to happen. But people who don't know are like, that doesn't make sense to me, it must be a conspiracy.
Well, can we also mention one thing here? This is not the first attack that had been attempted to be done on the World Trade Center. As a matter of fact, one of the things that lends credence to a lot of these conspiracy theories in the eyes of conspiracists is this idea that the World Trade Center had actually had a bomb go off in the basement, which was the intention of bringing it down. This was back in the early 90s. 93. It was right after Bill Clinton was inaugurated. So we need to understand that there is a historical context right here. So, Christo, can you? I don't think that you were prepared to talk about the first bombing, but the idea is basically that the destruction at the bottom of the structure was meant to ripple through the entire building and thus bring it down. Correct?
I need to know what type of explosive it was, but you have to understand in the early '90s, ANTFO was basically ammonium nitrate fuel oil was the go-to easily made bomb of terrorists, including Timothy McVeigh in Oklahoma City. And an ANTFO bomb filling the whole of a cargo van, I could imagine in the proper spot, causing catastrophic damage. And I imagine the idea would be to bring down the building, yes. Very, very quickly and efficiently. That's also, that's how they start a lot of demolitions.
So, let me give you some facts about this. This took place on February 26, 1993. A bomb exploded in the basement parking garage below the North Tower of the World Trade Center. It killed 6 people, wounded more than 1,000. 50,000 people were forced to evacuate the towers as smoke and flames spread upwards. And yes, the plot's leader, Ramzi Youssef, later told the FBI he had hoped to topple one tower into the other, killing some 250,000 civilians. Yeah, so let me tell you what this was. It was loaded with around 1,300 pounds of urea nitrate and hydrogen gas cylinders, along with cyanide. And the bomb exploded inside a yellow Ryder van parked on the B2 level of the parking garage under the North Tower.
That's an insane bomb. I'm reading about it right now. This is absolutely insane. But it's also 590 kilograms. This is 1,300 pounds of bomb inside of a van. We're talking about 150 tons of force. I'm talking like a plane is going to do more damage than this bomb. In this context.
Not only that, but that wasn't the only bomb of 1993. I mean, if you remember Addams Family Values.
Addams Family Values is great, and it's one of Christopher Lloyd's best works, and I'll thank you to leave that name out your mouth.
No, I said it was a bomb, meaning it did not make anywhere close to enough of the budget to get it back. But I understand what you're saying, and I still enjoy that movie. I like the Addams Family. I like the Addams Family.
I look forward to seeing what they do with Wednesday, the new movie that they're going to be coming out with.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't have high hopes because it's Tim Burton, and he's made the same movie for 30 years. But, I'll watch it. I'm excited.
Tim Burton making an Addams Family movie is a beautiful collection of IP that we're going to talk about here. Like, if...
It definitely feels like it's 20 years too late, though.
No, hold on. We got to get back to Christo on this.
I feel like the most dangerous part of this bomb was probably the compressed tanks of bottled hydrogen at the end, because they're going to create a bigger cloud. But, I mean, there's a lot of force in a 500-kilogram bomb, but they built the World Trade Center to be robust. The man who designed it called it untoppable in the spirit of being the fucking White Star Line of Titanic.
Yeah, why do people do that? That feels like it's just a curse.
But, I mean, these things, you have to dig into the bedrock to make these things, which is why I think a basement attack was unsuccessful and an aerial attack was imminently successful.
The other thing that we should note about this, that we haven't noted, is that there is a very specific form of racism and fear that is perpetuated as a result of the 1993 attacks, which lead horrifically into the September 11th attacks. Before September 11th, 2001, I don't think any of us knew who Al-Qaeda was, right?
We definitely did not know the difference between Sunni and Shiite Muslims.
No, we didn't, but there was this idea that radical Muslims and terror plots against the United States. And, I'm not saying people need to go back and rewatch the 1998 movie with Denzel Washington, The Siege, but to get a glimpse into what popular depictions of Muslims in the United States was at that time, you really do need to go back and see how this operated in here too. There was such a blatant fear-mongering that went on for the better part of a decade. And then once September 11th occurs, then we get into some real horrific stuff with the War on Terror.
Do y'all remember Rambo 3 where he helped the Taliban?
I was just saying, I do have the 1988 seminal hit, The Sayings of the Ayatollah Khomeini, which did nothing in its American publication to dissuade Americans that Muslims were just, quote, bad. And the news did nothing to dissuade them of that. And 2001 was not a banner year for helping Americans realize that religious extremism is not the same as religious practice.
Thank you. Yes, I really wanted to make that clear on the pod too. Like, none of us are dyed-in-the-wool nationalists in here. We want to approach people with empathy and thought. But the reality of a blinding amount of patriotism as a means of a show of force against terrorism also meant that we couldn't look at things with nuance. Let's set something up. By early 96, the architect of the 93 World Terror Center bombing, Ramzi Youssef, his uncle, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, had plotted with his nephew to bring down the planes in the Bojinka plot and wired him money before the first World Trade Center bombing. But KSM, as he's going to be known in popular documentation, evades capture. He rises in the ranks of Al-Qaeda, which is a militant Islamic group, and he becomes one of Osama bin Laden's top lieutenants. He's the principal architect of the terrorist attacks of September 11th. And he orchestrates the destruction of the Twin Towers, the attack on the Pentagon, and the mass murder of thousands of civilians on U.S. soil. U.S. and Canadian civilian airspaces closed until September 13th. Wall Street trading closed until September 17th. Creation of an eventual global economic recession. Cleanup of the World Trade Center site was completed in May 2002. I know this because I went there with Mrs. Moore on our annual jaunt to New York. Do you remember when she would take students out there?
Yep.
Yeah. I shout out to Sally Moore or Susan Moore. Rest in peace.
R.I.P. the great one.
Different. Yeah. The Pentagon repaired within a year. Almost 3,000 people died. 2,977 fatalities, 25,000 people injured, substantial long-term health consequences, $10 billion in infrastructure and property damage. It remains the deadliest terror attack in human history and the single deadliest incident for firefighters and law enforcement officers in the history of the United States, with 340 and 72 killed, respectively. That's wild. So that is some incredible context.
Also, 20 years later, you still cannot make fun of a firefighter. 20 years later, you're just not allowed. I wish you could, but you can't.
I don't know. I feel like they do it every week on 911 on Fox.
Okay, but here's the thing. Dennis Leary became a serious actor because of September 11th, okay? Like, all props.
I've seen Rescue Me, yes.
All props to Dennis Leary. He's, here in Massachusetts, he's kind of a god or a gad. But he's somebody that you have to pay homage to through his work and respecting firefighters and thinking about this. And all deep respect.
Except that he's a dick.
I said Massachusetts, right? Give me a break here. What do you want from us?
I mean, to not revere Dennis Leary. Am I really clear about that?
Plus, that was like the mid-2000s where, like, asshole main characters, were like the norm.
Yeah, but here's the thing. I can always revere Dennis Leary since I live near Revere, Massachusetts. Yeah, there we go. I'm happy about that. Look at Zach's soul evacuating from his body. Proud of that.
Have I mentioned that you guys could find anyone else to give you these numbers?
But then who's...
It's not hard.
But we love having you around for this sort of context right here. And somebody else has to laugh at my jokes, because Zach's clearly not. So next time that I do it, you gotta laugh.
So, Kyle, do you have any more history leading up to the 9/11 attacks you want to go over before we start covering the other conspiracies?
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about Osama bin Laden and his work that he was doing in Yemen before the September 11th terrorist attacks.
Just so everyone on Earth knows, we just ended a 20-year war in Afghanistan, but every country Kyle's about to mention will not be any of the 2 countries we invaded.
Yeah, no. Just to be clear, what's going on in Bosnia and Herzegovina as safe havens for terrorists, we see how radical Islamic groups emerge through Saudi Arabia and necessarily work to disenfranchise American interests that were out there. And American interests are very high because what, folks?
Oil?
Gas? Money? Freedom?
Like, there has to be an understanding that the United States, over its existence, has engaged with foreign governments for economic incentives, right? This is a touchy subject right there. So, we still on, or Zach, you took off your phones?
Oh, no, I'm still on. I thought somebody was mowing the lawn outside, but it ends up it's just my adorable cat purring underneath my chair.
Let's talk about Bin Laden for a second.
Seamless transition. It's
absolutely seamless.
I've never heard anyone say that sentence out loud before. Let's talk about Bin Laden for a second.
Kyle, do you have any idea how depressed I am? I'm gonna have to go have a smoke after this. Couldn't we talk about the slang for podcasts for one damn minute before we talk about that Condoleezza Rice objectifying, bizarre volleyball playing madman that helped orchestrate the worst thing in our youth? Couldn't we just talk about anything?
Well, while Bin Laden was at college in the late 70s, he became a follower of the radical and Islamist scholar Abdullah Azzam, who believed that all Muslims should rise up in jihad or holy war to create a single Islamic state. Let's make it clear. Not every person that is exposed to this idea believes this, okay? I just want to be very clear that I'm not trying to promote a nationalist ideology right here. But there is something that you need to hear about. Bin Laden eventually becomes radicalized, and he sets up camp in Saudi Arabia. Then you also begin to see how different Americans are killed through operations that he has. Bin Laden leaves Saudi Arabia for the more militantly Islamist Sudan. After more than a year of preparation, Al-Qaeda strikes for the first time. A bomb explodes in a hotel in Aden, Yemen, that had housed American troops on their way to a peacekeeping mission in Somalia. No Americans died in the blast, but 2 Austrian tourists did. Then in October 12th, 2000, a small boat loaded with explosives plowed into the hull of the USS Cole, which is an American naval destroyer docked off the coast of Yemen. 17 sailors were killed. God, we've already talked about the Maine on here too, but this was an actual thing that happened and was an actual terrorist attack. 17 sailors were killed, 38 were injured. Bin Laden takes the credit for this incident as well. So he's already a person for whom he should be more on our radar. So why do people keep talking about this as though it's an inside job? A couple of reasons. In research, and based on our lives experiences, George Bush gets lauded as a hero, but did they do enough to stop Bin Laden from carrying out his plan? Obviously, the answer is no. Even though there was enough intel on Bin Laden.
After 9/11, extrajudicial drone strike murders required a lot less evidence than we had on Bin Laden, I'll tell you that.
Oh my god. Yeah, that's the thing, though. We move to wholly change legislation, too. We get things like the Patriot Act, which allows for...
Prison courts.
Yeah, Guantanamo Bay. We now no longer can wear shoes before we get into security at an airport. Now we have to go through longer TSA searches, which are even greater. And I mean, search and seizure of us just goes up incredibly high. I mean, there are plenty of historians that I know that look at what's happened to the United States afterwards and just say, why? And a lot of it is fear of whether or not there could be anything like shoe bombs or, you know,
laptop
anthrax.
Anthrax.
Yeah, all these things that happen. And I'm not talking Anthrax, the great metal band, okay? Shout out to Scott Ian right now.
Is this a VH1 documentary? If Scott Ian's on, it's gotta be.
Thank you for bringing up Behind the Music and talking about how important Black Sabbath is, okay?
I just have to say, the craziest thing to me is that after any sort of attack, authoritarianism kind of goes up, and, like, stop and frisk in New York skyrocketed. You know, everyone's like, if you see something, say something, and blah, blah, blah. And this happened like in 2016, it happened in 2011, it happened in 2008. Like all these things happened. And there's a direct correlation between the amount of authoritarianism you see in a social situation and the amount of racism you also see in that situation. They are directly correlated because the people who are on board with unquestioning authority are also on board with profiling in a big way.
18 people were necessarily involved in this attack. Here's the thing. This is why conspiracy theories take root, okay? And before we get into, like, bigger discussions, let's just make it clear. This is proportionality bias. There's a reason that scumbags like Bill O'Reilly, a known sexual predator who can go jump off a cliff as far as I'm concerned, has gone on record as saying Muslims killed us on September 11th because he is somebody that is engaged in the fear-mongering, and he also can't wrap his head around this idea that less than two dozen people were involved in successfully taking down American institutions, buildings, and striking fear, okay? But this is why we talk about this. I mean, it's just... Yeah, this is proportionality bias.
The former president of these United States, Donald J. Trump, said that he saw Muslims cheering as the buildings fell, which was thoroughly debunked by everyone who knew him and was around him on September 11th, and then said, "It looks like my building is now the tallest in New York." He said that on, like, September 12th.
We should actually post that clip for when we upload this episode.
I think that'll be the clip at the very beginning right there. I'm more than happy to let 45 shoot himself in the foot. That's the reason why he didn't go off to war after all. I'm sorry, that's Bone Spurs. Yeah, Bone Spurs.
It's Bone Spurs. He also had a horrible case of richness, which I find really keeps people out of the draft super well.
What about another figure that's adjacent to Trump? You know who we haven't talked about is America's mayor, Rudy Giuliani. But we can't overemphasize just how involved Giuliani was in being the public figure of the response to September 11th. Yes, there's W up there speaking to construction workers and first responders.
But who was taking him around?
Megaphone.
Who was taking him from site to site? Who was literally with a reporter who was like, it's happening that way, and ran into the rubble? None other than the mayor of America, who is now a clown. Like, how can you reconcile these two? Like, the man whose hair dye drips into his farts is also the same man who made us feel like it would be okay.
There's so much that goes into discussion of Rudy Giuliani, and the September 11th attacks are kind of a look into it. There's this great Vanity Fair piece that I highly recommend. That's all about how
the one that just came out like a month ago.
Yeah, absolutely, and I highly recommend it. We should include a link to it at this pod because it's a fascinating look at how different facets of Giuliani's life all culminated in September 11th. He was not a popular mayor, particularly among his communities of color, especially as he lost the original mayoral bid, and he became known for the broken windows policy, which was thought to, help move the process of gentrification in New York along, too. But he becomes the figurehead of this, too. He inevitably gets what all conservative figures want, which is a James Woods starring as him in a biopic.
He gets what he wants, a absolute blank check to act however he wants and spend whatever he wants, because he can say, hey, remember I was mayor on 9/11? And that's the conspiracy theory right there, by the way. You bring it down because the people in power want to stay in power and they want to get rich doing it.
But yeah, this is where power is seen as corrupting. In the case of Rudy Giuliani, absolutely. It corrupted him in such a way that he believed that he could do no wrong. He's absolutely a Shakespearean epic of tragedy, but his involvement as a public face of September 11th cannot be overlooked. He was on what is it with New York politicians being there during national tragedies, okay? First, the now disgraced Andrew Cuomo of COVID-19 and cases and nursing homes and data, that's just wild to me. And obviously, I say first, Rudy Giuliani there before that with his movement from America's Mayor into an Iago of sorts. I don't even know how to describe it with it. But that's proportionality bias right there, right?
This was full when I started this pod.
I just bought a bottle of Old Forester, and let me tell you, the cocktail that I made with it was a New York Sour, which is delicious.
I was thinking we could make a Manhattan, and I was wondering if we were ever going to fucking talk about how they removed the original trailer scene of Tobey Maguire wrapping up the bank or the thieves between the two towers.
Let's talk about this right here, Zach. I think that this is your moment to shine, sir.
In fall 2000, in summer 2001, they released a teaser trailer for the first live-action Spider-Man. All of us were super excited about it because everyone in this pod are huge Spider-Man fans. In the trailer, he does stop a carjacking and then ends up, not a carjacking, he's chased, it doesn't matter. He takes the car and basically puts it into a giant web between the two towers. And that was the teaser for
a helicopter.
Month or so. And then 9/11 happened. And then after that, they were like, we got to take that out. And then they actually went back and re-edited the original Spider-Man movie to actually take out the Twin Towers from the skyline.
Am I misremembering this, or was one of the original bank robbers David Hyde Pierce?
I don't think... Remember, the bank robbers in this teaser, it was just basically actors that were hired for a teaser. And let's be honest, the big hook was the web between the two towers right there. So I don't think they got David Hyde Pierce for that.
But they did make sure when they re-edited Spider-Man, they made sure to get a picture of Tobey Maguire majestically sitting on top of an American flag.
Yeah, there's always a scene where Spider-Man swings in, even in Spider-Man 3, when, Mary Jane's about to die and Venom and Sandman and Hobgoblin are all there. He has enough time to swing in front of a waving American flag, pose for about 10 seconds, and then keep going. Where everyone cheers, by the way, when he lands in front of the American flag.
All right, not to prop up James Franco at all, who has plenty of problems, and we're not going to get into this, but I take great umbrage in you calling him Hobgoblin. It is very clearly Green Goblin. Comics continuity makes sure that he is still Green Goblin, carrying on his dad's lineage, and when he dies a Spectacular Spider-Man number 200, he dies as the Green Goblin. So, props to Harry.
The Hobgoblin's from the animated. The Hobgoblin is, I think, at first from the animated 90s show, and he's from a different dimension, and I think that's the Hobgoblin. Green Goblin 2 is Harry Osborn, I thought.
Well, Hobgoblin in the comics continuity, and we're so far off track from 9/11, is Ned Leeds, who was Betty Brant's boyfriend and friend. He's actually inspires the mental breakdown that Spider-Man has during Kraven's Last Hunt, which is a fantastic, seminal Spider-Man story that if you haven't read it yet, I highly recommend it. But no,
I loved Kraven's 80s look. That huge, the fur collar and the slick back hair. You're just like, that's a man that knows how to shoot a gun. You can just tell.
All right, if Avi Arad or Kevin Feige is listening to this pod, and, what else are they going to do? If they're listening to this pod, they need to understand that that I have a pitch for a Spider-Man 4 that is actually, really dark, but really fantastic, and would bring in the main cast of characters in a big way. Yeah, sure, you might have Doc Ock returning in No Way Home, whose trailer came out recently while we're recording this, but damn it! Somebody get in touch with me and give me $200 million, an unproven writer-director, so I can make my Spider-Man dreams come true. I'm sure it won't end terribly.
Y'all are right, by the way. I was completely wrong. You're right. It was the Green Goblin. I was incorrect. I was making the mistake because in the comics, the nickname for the Green Goblin is Harry.
That's right.
But it's Harold. I don't remember the last name. You're correct. I was wrong. I take it back.
I just want everyone at the MCU to know that they don't have to give me several $100 million. But if you just if you want to wipe out my student loans, I will be your scientific advisor on any films. That's it. That's the whole deal.
Look, I will support this along with my Coke Money Fund that I'm clearly asking for by looking for a script for this movie. Okay, let's talk about September 11th and Spider-Man though. It's what happens in Spider-Man in a pivotal scene. There's Spidey saving Mary Jane and I don't know what they're on. I don't know what bridge they're on, but anyways, there's
It's either the Brooklyn or the George Washington. That's what everyone likes to draw.
But what are all the kids in? They're all in like a field trip.
I think that's the George Washington no, that's the Roosevelt Bridge. That's the Roosevelt Bridge that they have the tram.
Okay, I was gonna say, what's the Roosevelt Bridge? The tram?
The tram, isn't that with the kids or the whatever?
That's exactly what I was looking for. Thank you. Yeah, so Spidey saves Mary Jane and the kids on the tram, and then the Green Goblin's going to be there and, like, kill Spidey, and then all the New Yorkers
You mess
come
with
out.
one of us, you mess with all of us. That's...
Thank you right there. In my thesis, which is weirdly getting promoted here twice, I talk about how that representation of New Yorkers post 9/11 is one of the reasons for that movie's success, because it's really the first post 9/11 movie that allows people to feel like they come together in pop entertainment. And it's a major reason why superhero movies in general start to push us forward, because we can look at this with fictional context. We don't have to look at the messiness of American foreign policy, and we thus get to also see heroes in bright colors going on and beating up dudes. It's absolutely phenomenal.
And then 20 years later, Disney was like, that's so successful, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make a TV show where a black Captain America and a guy from World War II deal with the geopolitics of everything we've just seen happen for the last 20 years. Have fun with that.
Yep.
Good luck.
And,
also,
yeah, and it was a messy show, but very
and we'll
interesting.
sprinkle in some systemic racism just along the way.
Shout out to Carl Lumley in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, okay? He was great. He was absolutely great in that.
I love that. I loved everything about that show. I won't pretend like I didn't. The only thing I can't stand is they're like, hey, what are we going to do with the Black Falcon? Oh, he's going to own a shrimp boat.
I know this is wildly out of character for me, but we need to get back on track. So where are we at? Kyle, do you have any more history leading up to 9/11? Because we have still only covered the conspiracies for like 10 minutes.
Zach, can I just say, I just want to say, I'm sorry to interrupt, Kyle, but this really gives you the context. We can talk about every single thing that has happened in our lives since 2001 and easily draw a very short line to 9/11. And we have done this in the most bizarre cornucopia of bullshit I've ever been a part of.
I agree with you if this was a podcast about covering like how we feel and not a podcast covering conspiracies specifically. I'm just saying we should probably give the audience the only reason they tune in.
But we're getting this idea that there was an inside job ultimately, and that this is what popularizes the term a false flag operation, which is meant to distract you from going-ons at home. It should be very clear that going into the Bush's presidency, the 43rd president of the United States was a fatted calf, right? We have a budget surplus. We have not only a balanced budget, but we have more money than we know what to do with. And we are in Rome before the fall, right? We have so much that's going on with us. That
every reference you've just made is a lot to unpack. That's a statement you can only make.
But that's
the
what
fatted calf, Rome before the fall. Like, Jesus Christ, Kyle. Could you densely pack a sentence with anything else? Is there some Shakespeare you want to put in there?
If I had that much luggage when I came home, I wouldn't unpack for 2 weeks.
All right, hold on. I need to take off the David Foster Wallace bandana that I'm clearly wearing right now, because here's the thing. The United States is essentially a sort of target. In 1999, what else do we have going on for us? There's a malaise of the...
Spice Girls.
We have, yes, thank you for that, and Spice Up Your Life is something that I want to talk about here on the show, but we're not there yet, okay? One thing that I want to get to is Fight Club and the decline of, or for perceived decline of American masculinity. Don't forget, the original Fight Club ends with Ed Norton's narrator watching with Marla the Twin Towers fall while the Pixies' Where's My Mind plays. And that's a happy ending.
It's not the Twin Towers, it's the entire financial district of an unnamed city that is clearly a proxy for New York. Yeah, so Cleveland.
Little known fact, the entire cast of the Drew Carey show was killed when the buildings came down in Fight Club. Yeah.
Oh my god.
Jesus Christ. I'm not gonna... this... Ohio!
I'm just saying, what? It's a Drew Carey show reference. No one likes the Drew Carey show?
Diedrich Bader is going to come on this show and punch us.
A big RIP to all the Winford Ladder employees, because I remember the name of the store he worked at. That's in here. I've forgotten calculus, but luckily I remember where Drew Carey worked. Also, him and his friends created Buzz Beer. Please, somebody just put me out of my misery. It's all in here. It's all in here.
Didn't Buzzed Beer have caffeine in it? Wasn't that the thing?
Yes, it was coffee beer. That was the whole thing. It was coffee beer. Please stop me. I can keep talking about that.
So it was basically just Four Loko.
Guys, I don't want to be talking about the Drew Carey show in so many ways, okay?
Then when am I going to get my shot, Kyle? When's going to be my time? Okay?
When are we going to do an entire Drew Carey show retrospective? Did you know that the final season of that show, they knew no one was watching, so they just changed the entire concept where Drew Carey moved in with Mimi?
Yes.
Did you know that? And they were roommates?
Actually,
the last season of that show is wild.
So Mimi married his brother, who was a cross-dresser, not trans, but a cross-dresser, and then they lived in a mobile home that was on the property. Please make me stop. Talk about anything else.
I'm trying so hard. This is no, I can't do. How?
I showed Lauren 2 openings to the Drew Carey show because we've been watching that. What's the show on ABC where it's like it's a game show, but the Craig Ferguson hosts it. Anyways, Lauren didn't know who Craig Ferguson was, so I showed her some old clips from Drew Carey and showed her the openings, and she was like, "Oh, okay." Like, she was completely unimpressed. I was like, "No, they changed your theme song like 5 times or some shit." Like, it was fun.
I actually have personal anecdotes about the opening of Drew Carey that are directly impacted by my presence. Please, So 9/11.
Oh no.
This is what I'm going to be known for on the internet.
Your scientific breakdown of how jet fuel can melt steel beams, but also your comprehensive knowledge of Drew Carey circa the mid-90s.
My favorite opening is when they play the harp and they do Everybody Loves Wendy. But that's not important either. So the important thing is not that jet fuel can't melt steel beams in the most oblique sense of the word melt, but what it can do is cause enormous stress and fatigue. And what I didn't mention is the thermal coefficient of expansion, which means that for every meter there is a steel I-beam. If you heat it up 800 degrees, it gets 17 millimeters longer. And if you do that unevenly, what you're going to get is shear, which will snap gridirons at the connector plates. And then, suddenly what you have is an I-beam that may not be melted, but it's also not supporting anything.
I actually heard a good metaphor for it. It was like somebody said it's not unlike cooking spaghetti in a pot. The spaghetti doesn't melt, but the second that it gets warm, it actually becomes really flaccid, and it's not structurally sound at that point. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that's a nice, easy way to explain that.
That's why Seattle doesn't build any of their bridges out of spaghetti anymore.
I know. Yeah. After the Mothman was there in '83, that bridge collapsed. They'll never do it again.
So possible motives claimed by conspiracy theorists for such actions include justifying the invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq, even though the U.S. government concluded Iraq was not involved in the attacks, to advance their geostrategic interests. There are plans, accordingly, to construct a natural gas pipeline through Afghanistan. So again, the idea of economics and oil. Other theories revolve around authorities having advanced knowledge of the attacks and deliberately ignoring or assisting the attackers, most famously in Fahrenheit 9/11, when you look at that now infamous clip of George W. Bush reading books to children and being told that the towers have just fallen and still reading right there. That blank expression is going to haunt my damn life for my remaining days. The National Institute of Standards and Technology and the technology magazine Popular Mechanics have all investigated and rejected the claims made by September 11th conspiracy theorists, and yet you can still go online today and find multiple different conspiracies around here, which suggest that someone destroyed the towers intentionally, possibly as a false flag operation to justify the subsequent war on terror. Here's things that you can find. Loose Change, which is still available for rent or purchase on Google Play, YouTube, and Apple TV. It's also listed on Amazon Prime Video, but it's currently unable to buy. There's also conspiracy theory books and audiobooks for sale on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes. Let's just be very clear. All of this is like heavy skepticism that takes into account the idea of the 9/11 Commission and says, I don't necessarily think that it's there. These are what we talk about as the 9/11 truther conspiracies. And I have friends I have friends in my life that deeply believe everything that Christo said is a lie. A blatant lie. And that is wild to me. Because who would have ever thought that anti-science propaganda would ever get us in trouble in the year 2021?
Yeah, it's wild.
It's ultimately the idea that there is the main conspiracy that comes out of this that has been wildly debunked is this idea that the United States or other operatives working with the United States engineered the September 11th attacks as part of an insider job to bring on the war on terror. And this gets to the proportionality bias of not being able to believe that only a few people were involved in something that changed the entire geopolitical landscape of the world.
Well, it's funny you should say that for two reasons. One, 12 people have walked on the moon, as my shirt says, and that changed the entire geopolitical landscape of the Cold War. And I know that hundreds of people generated to that effort. What I'm saying is, only 2 people could land at a time, and it still captivated a nation. But these bizarre theories do not... You can be drawn in even if you're a brilliant person, or, such as it is, the son of Carl Sagan, writer and director of Cosmos, has a son who is a lifelong engineer and 9/11 truther. You don't have to be Johnny Redneck to be like, oh, the people in power, it's all a conspiracy. Look at the facts. You could be a brilliant, educated mind from a long line of pure liberalism and still think, no, it's a conspiracy, I don't buy it.
When doing research I found there's a Professor Karen Douglas. He's a social psychologist at the University of Kent. She was talking about 9/11 truthers, and she said conspiracy theories often emerge as a result of this need for an explanation that's proportional to the event itself. Often the official explanation appears quite mundane to people, and it's not particularly satisfying. And first of all, that quote is perfect for our podcast, so I kind of want to put that somewhere permanently.
Because the podcast is not particularly satisfying, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
How dare you, okay? We have covered the history of the September 11th attacks and Drew Carey simultaneously. Maybe not successfully, but we've done it.
I know we say this a lot on the show, but it seems like it's a fundamental misunderstanding of science or just a lack of caring of whether or not you're correct.
And it's also a willingness to buy in to the lie, because if the lie seems credible enough, you can necessarily buy into this. We can form a direct line between 9/11 truthers, anti-vaxxers, and people that eventually fall into QAnon, which now is this massive maelstrom of conspiracy theories and activity that it's impossible to look at anything else. If you've played the game for Inside by the creators of Limbo, essentially QAnon is the end of that game, which is just a jumbled mass of people and bodies all creating this horrific organism that takes over things. Sorry for spoiling a 5-year-old game, but yeah, that's the imagery that I want people to look at when they see QAnon. It's just that. But you can look right to this.
Could we maybe generate some sort of wrap-up? I'm an hour late to a work meeting.
Well, first of all, the fact that a lot of people say that Building 7 was a controlled demolition and that it shouldn't have fallen when the two towers fell down is essentially just incorrect. I mean, the North Tower collapsing caused a considerable amount of debris to smash into the south face of Building 7, effectively scooping out 25% of the building from the ground to the 10th floor. It massively weakened the structural integrity, and the building's internal fire suppression system blocked the necessary water pressure to actually fight the fires. So they literally couldn't put the fires out. A lot of people talk about how the BBC reported that Building 7 fell before it did. Here's the thing, though. If you actually look at the official timeline, the news first broke on CNN that the Building 7 was going to fall. Different news people in the United States news networks in the United States started picking up these feeds. And next thing you know, the BBC is hearing the same thing and just said, accidentally, that the building had fallen. It was literally just a mistake. And a lot of people use that as evidence that it was an inside job and the news sources actually knew about it.
Also, just of note, modern news has things all around it, banners and runners, and that whole thing happened because 9/11. So, because that entire thing started on September 11th, and it literally has never stopped.
Yeah, the news supers and graphics completely changed because of this, and a constant stream of information that creates national anxiety, which could also be linked to the September 11th terrorist attacks. And by the way, what are we supposed to think whenever we see two of the biggest buildings in the world right next to 7 World Trade Center collapse? Do we think that 7 World Trade Center is somehow safe in a game of, like, building tag? Hell no, okay? So that's why the theory is just so horrific to believe. What else you got?
Well, if you look at the Pentagon, a lot of people say that the hole was too small for a plane, right? The fact that there wasn't any debris on the ground, the fact that there weren't any bodies anywhere, right? The Pentagon Building Performance Report estimates that the entry hole wasn't in fact 16 feet, which a lot of people actually believe. It was actually closer to 75 feet across. When the plane hit, one wing disintegrated while the other one was sheared off before impact, and that's why the hole was 75 feet wide. According to multiple eyewitnesses, according to multiple eyewitnesses, not only did they see dead bodies all around the Pentagon, but they said the reason that all the photos don't necessarily show that is because almost the entirety of the inside of the plane was actually inside the Pentagon, inside of people's offices. So those people that their part of their buildings got destroyed, there were just dead bodies all around. And for some reason, conspiracy theorists just don't want to believe that. They just think that's the dumbest thing in the world because they can't see it with their own eyes, like people who don't believe in vaccines.
What I don't understand, a thing that really debunks a lot of the conspiracies for me, is not Flight 11, not 175, not 77, but the fact that the capstone attack that would have been the biggest news story had it succeeded, 93, United Flight 93, didn't reach its target, and that's why I don't think it was a cover-up. Like, why would they have just suddenly... If you have the power to control and like, hijack 4 planes, you don't get 3 out of 4 in there. That's not how this goes down. If you have the power and money and wherewithal, then you just hire pilots that are going to fly it where you need it to go.
Exactly. That's one of the things that comes up in conspiracies, though, is this idea that 93 also is sort of a false flag, just meant to throw people off the trail in there. And but that's the thinking that allows for us to get to that point, is a willingness to create a narrative where there really is none. Right there. So, Zach, everything that you've just said is a misinterpretation of fact. No, you've provided facts, but the interpretations beforehand is a misinterpretation of the information. And it's why people need to look at the facts and see this. And unfortunately, through the September 11th attacks and this assumption that Islamist terrorists are directly involved, and therefore it paints a religion of a billion people as a wholly negative thing, just becomes this overwhelming narrative through which we look at all these other lenses. This is almost too big. This is a huge podcast because we all have emotional reactions to it because we're processing trauma.
You know what's interesting to me? The first pop culture reaction that I can remember to 9/11, like, thematically, didn't actually happen to me until years later, but I watched the West Wing special episode, Isaac and Ishmael, where they were like, they took all these young children, and they were like from high school or whatever, and because I'm a grizzled old bastard, I think people in high school are wee children, and they were like, hey, Al-Qaeda is to Islam as blank is to Christianity, and the big reveal is that they were like, the big SAT syllogism they use is Al-Qaeda is to Islam as the KKK is to Christianity, and that, like, blows all these little kids' minds. And as problematic as that episode is, and it is, looking back, a little problematic, that was, like, the first time I was like, oh, I knew Christian extremists were bad, and I'd always harbored a big dislike of evangelical Christians, but painting all Muslims as Al-Qaeda was like painting all Christians as the Ku Klux Klan, which is, on the face of it, really disturbing and like, really harmful. And I think that that's what feeds into the conspiracies the most. You can look at somebody that is the other and paint with as broad a brush you like because it's us versus them, and then reason just goes out the window.
The reality of everything you just said, which was so elegantly well done, much like what Aaron Sorkin does normally, is that you have just summed up, in a lot of ways, our responses to the September 11th attacks. I mean, it's impossible to talk about just the conspiracies without also realizing the emotion, which is why the conspiracies come so late at the end. We have to recognize the emotions and where we were, because it's a galvanizing moment in all of our lives. And that's the reason, really, why I wanted you here, Christo, not just because you're good at science. Yeah, you're good at science. That's what I want to say, is also that, but it's also because you provide an emotional lens and understanding into this.
What's going to be funny is that Zach is going to take what I eloquently said, and he's going to cut it from me saying it, and he's just going to redub my lines with him, and be like, and I'm going to get an email that just says, "Stick to science, asshole." That's. Are you going to cut this together into like an hour? Or could you do that?
This is going to be 10 minutes. Yeah, no, I'm joking.
It's just the Drew Carey bit.
Just the Drew Carey parts.
This is going to be used as a pitch for the reboot of the Drew Carey show. Okay, so Christo, do you have anything you want to plug?
So not especially. I'm at Christo CS on Twitter. Also, dining with Hannibal. Never mind.
That inside joke is never going to go away, and I love it. Thank you so much. Every single time. Dinner with Hannibal. Christo plug.
Kyle, do you have anything you need to plug?
Oh, no, because Christo's done everything. If you want to get in touch with us, again, you can find us on Twitter at ConspireWho. We have a Facebook page for those who conspire. If you want to email us and tell us your story about September 11th or just share future episode ideas with us, feel free to reach us at thosewhoconspire@gmail.com.
I do want to say, if anyone has literally anything at all to correct me on in my math, science, politics, religion, whether or not we landed on the moon, or if Sasquatch is real, he is csmith18 at moreheadstate.edu.
Thank you very much. And send all your Drew Carey fanfic over there. You're going to get so much slash fiction with Drew Carey. It's unbelievable.
Diedrich Bader is a straight himbo, so what's up?
Again, a special thanks to Christo Smith for joining us today and debunking a lot of the science and the false claims that surround conspiracy theories surrounding September 11th. And until next time, I'm Kyle.
And I'm Zach.
And this is Those Who Conspire. Bye!
Bye!